When working at Hooters, it's normal to get a few stares from old, lecherous men and young hotshots alike. I didn't mind mostly. I knew what I was signing up for, and the pay was decent. The most I ever got was the occasional pinch on the ass, and a quick word with the manager normally sorted those individuals out. But one night, the restaurant was especially quiet, and expecting little traffic, the manager dismissed a few of us early, leaving behind only myself and this other girl, Miranda, to close up when the time came around. The manager gave us the keys and thanked us for the day's work. I was anxious to leave, but rent this month was tight, and I needed that sweet overtime to make up for it. I was just finishing up one guy's order when out of the corner of my eye, I watched curiously as some old dude, complete in a trucker's fit, classic tartan coat and baseball hat, fiddled with something in his hand, a piece of metal glinting as it spun. Ignoring it, I wrote the last part of the customer's order and hurried back to the kitchen. All the cooking staff were gone, and it was up to Miranda and I to fill out whatever was needed. A task made more difficult by the fact that I had no idea where she was. An hour in, Miranda finally appeared. She looked shaken, pale and twitchy. I rolled my eyes and continued scrubbing the tables. I knew she was a druggie and figured that she'd spent the past hour shooting up in the toilets. By now, the restaurant was sparse. There were only 2 people left, that trucker dude, and another guy idly texting on his phone in the corner suite, facing away from us. Outside was pitch black, and the clock read 11 p.m., 1 more hour to go. The trucker was staring at me. I just knew it was something I picked up on the job. Anytime I bent over, had my back turned, those eyes were staring greedily. But this time, there was no manager to protect me, only Miranda. And I figured, why not give the old fart a show? He'd be gone soon anyway. But there was something instinctively repulsive about this guy in particular, the way a little spit trail dribbled from the corner of his mouth, or the fact that one of his eyes was significantly larger than the other, bloodshot and throbbing almost. The way he was looking at me, I thought it'd explode. I continued brushing under the table next to his, and noticed that same metal piece he was fiddling with earlier. My heart dropped. It was unmistakably a small revolver. I cursed myself for not checking properly earlier, and continued to work, my mind set on leaving as soon as the chance arose. But there was no way out other than the front door, which he had a clear view of. And the back was locked by the manager, as was the usual procedure. Head pounding, I realized the only way was through the toilets, a small window to fit through. But Miranda was once again gone, and I cussed her out under my breath. Would the trucker suspect something if both of us were gone? Before I could make my choice, I felt a cold, metal sensation to my temple. Raising my eyes, I became very wary of the gun pressed against my head, the trucker smiling wickedly.
"Where's your friend?"
he asked, in a low growl. I couldn't speak, instead pointing nervously towards the bathrooms.
"Go and get her. You've got a minute."
I steadily made my way over, but just before entering, I saw the texting guy, oblivious to what was happening. He was a looker, a real heartthrob, and I even had to think twice before coming back to the situation we were in. I realized I had an opportunity. Pretending to slip onto the table, I hurriedly whispered, "Call 911. Without waiting for an answer, I recovered and walked into the toilets, unaware of the dismissive head shake he had given me, and the trucker who had risen from his place. Blocking off the door with a broom against the handle, I automatically made a beeline for the middle stall, where the narrow window was. There was a pounding at the door, and I knew my time was limited. Swinging open the stall, I doubled over, hand covering my mouth. Sure enough, Miranda was there, or at least, what was left of her. It was as if she had been cut in every part possible. The only way I could recognize her was the vague Hooters icon on her chest. I barely withheld the urge to scream, and became aware that the banging had stopped. I waited, holding my breath. I didn't realize it then, but 5 minutes had passed before I could finally move again. Gathering myself, I climbed over her corpse, and tried to open the window. It was locked. I bashed myself against the glass, but it was no good. Nothing I did would open when I heard a bang, a gunshot echoing for a few seconds, and then an eerie quiet. I opened the door and was met by silence. Arming myself with the broom, I took each step warily, checking every corner. Both the texter and the trucker were gone, and the front door wide open. I took my chances and ran. I only managed a few yards before I tripped, sending my body sprawling to the floor. My blood froze. This was it. I was gonna die. When suddenly, a wet sensation came over my hands and knees. I looked back and saw the bloody mess that was the trucker, splayed out on the floor behind me, cut in the same exact way as Miranda was, his gun inches away. I tried pushing myself up, but the blood was everywhere, and to my horror, I kept slipping and sliding, getting it all over my clothes. A shadow fell over me, and looking up, I trembled to see the texter, a large machete in his hand, his face contorted into a twisted smile. Grabbing me by my hair, he lifted me up, and despite all my shrieking and struggling, nothing could free me.
Don't worry, I've called the police.
He cackled, his handsome features contorted into an ugly, cross-eyed craze.
They'll only find what's left of you.
As the machete grew closer and closer, I screamed louder and louder, until a much more deafening sound filled the room. The man let go of me, gasping and stumbling to the side. Behind him, the trucker held an outstretched arms, in his hand the smoking gun, lying flat on the floor. With a gargle, he collapsed once more, this time for good. I fainted, no longer able to take the stress, darkness overcoming my vision. The police arrived not soon after, as the texter had promised, and they whisked my unconscious body away into custody. The next few months, I spent in therapy, trying to overcome what had happened that night. They told me in small chunks over time of how the trucker had been an undercover cop, tracking this serial killer they called the Pretty Carver. He had never meant to hurt me, he just wanted both Miranda and I out of the way before he made his final move, which would prove to be fatal for him. Standing before his grave, I left flowers and softly thanked him. But on the car drive home, I could only think of one thing. They had never found the Pretty Carver's body. They were almost certain he had died. The trail of blood he had left was so substantial no human could have survived it. But I remember it, the very last thing I had saw before I blacked out. He limped out of the restaurant and into the darkness. He kept limping and struggling until he had disappeared completely. Surely he had died, right? Yeah, that's what I'll believe. After all, I've got bigger things on my mind now, like how my shift's starting soon. I have been working as a waitress at a restaurant called Hooters. It was the start of my 5th month working there. That day, we weren't as busy as usual. Out of 23 tables, only 6 were occupied. They were our regulars, calling their favorite waitress to serve food to them. I wasn't particularly busy, unlike everyone else, until the doorbell rang and a man dressed in all black, dirty clothes walked inside. His hair was greasy and his eyes and teeth had a yellow tint to them. He seemed to be in his 40s. I didn't want to serve him, but not having a choice, I dragged myself to him and gave him my best smile since he sat on one of my tables. While I took his order, I could feel him eyeing me up and down. Even after I left to give his order to the counter manager, I could still feel his cold stare on me. I pretended to be very busy so he wouldn't call me over, which actually worked. Until I had to bring his order to him. He asked me if I could sit and talk with him. We did chat with our regular customers, but he wasn't a regular, and he creeped me out. I apologized politely and then started to clean the tables. The entire time he sat there eating, his gaze was on me. I know this because I snuck a few peeks just to make sure I wasn't paranoid. After finishing his food, he left me a huge tip. The next day, he came to the restaurant at the same time and sat on my table again. I took his order, and as I was about to leave, he pulled me into his lap, whispering into my ear,
"I'm going to be a regular here, so stay on Daddy's lap."
Both shocked and disgusted by the gesture, I quickly stood up. I was about to walk away, when I changed my mind and sat across from him, thinking he did give me a good tip. I smiled at him and started talking, asking about his day and stuff. He told me a lot of things about himself, but what bothered me was that he told me that he lived 3 hours away from this place and drove every day just to see me. We talked a bit more before I went off to serve another table. Later, when I looked at the table he was at, he had already left. I was surprised that he had left me $300, which was double the amount I had received a day before. Days went by. He used to come at least 3 times a week and would always sit on my table. I would sit and talk to him for a while before I would attend to other customers. He would sit there finishing his food and heading off, leaving a huge tip. This carried on for a few more weeks. I was still repulsed by the man. But he did give me a good tip each time, so I put up with his antics. However, on one particular week, the man suddenly stopped coming to Hooters. I was mildly disappointed, but at the same time, I was relieved that I didn't have to put up with him for that week. However, that wasn't the strangest part of this story. On the last day of that week, I had just come back home from an 8-hour shift at 12 a.m. As I got ready for bed, I noticed that my pillows had been rearranged. That was weird. I lived alone. And I definitely didn't make my bed like that. I picked up one of my pillows when I realized that there was an envelope underneath it. Inside, there was a note that read,
Hello, sweetie. It's Daddy. Sorry I didn't see you this week. I'm moving out of state, so I left a little surprise in your closet.
I immediately realized who it was. It was the same creepy guy from Hooters. My legs started to buckle, and my lips started to quiver as I turned my gaze towards my closet. In the small crack between the 2 doors, I could see the same yellow eyes and the same yellow teeth smiling at me. I fell back towards the ground in shock.
Please, don't hurt me.
The man came out of the closet and edged towards me. I had no idea what he was going to do. I just sat there motionless. He knelt down in front of me, with his hand stretched out to me. He put his hand on my shoulder and kissed my forehead. And then he casually strolled out of my apartment. I still sat there quivering in fear for at least 20 minutes. I could barely describe in words what had just happened. I was confused, disgusted, angry, but afraid. Despite all the emotions I was feeling, I couldn't muster up the courage to report this to the police. However, I never saw that man again. And since then, I had quit being a Hooters girl and instead, I got a job at a local coffee shop. I hope people listening can understand that sometimes, the money isn't worth your safety and well-being.